know that popular idea of believers just vanishing into thin air before a time of global crisis? Have you ever stopped to wonder if that's what the Bible actually teaches? Today, we're diving into a source that challenges that very notion, and it asks a pretty critical question. Are we meant to be taken from the storm or sustained through it? So, the source we're looking at kicks things off with this really powerful parable. Picture this. A man is trapped on his roof during a massive flood. He prays, "God, save me." A little while later, a rowboat comes by. He waves it off, saying, "No thanks, I have faith, God will save me." Then a helicopter shows up. He waves that off too. "Nope, I'm waiting for God." Well, he drowns, and when he gets to heaven, he asks God, "Why didn't you save me?" God replies, "I sent you a rowboat and a helicopter. What more did you want?" This really sets the stage. The source asks, is the modern church that man on the roof, waiting for one very specific kind of rescue, while maybe ignoring the one that's already been provided? In that little story perfectly illustrates the two big ideas we're talking about. The source frames it as a choice between two types of divine protection. First, there's protection by presence. That's the rowboat, right? It's the idea that God carries his people through the flood. And then there's protection by absence, the vanishing act, where God just yanks them out of the crisis entirely. The big question is, which one does the Bible consistently promise? To answer that, the source suggests we first look at God's track record. The argument is pretty simple, really. The way God has shown up in the past is probably the best model for how he'll show up in the future. And here are the prime examples the source points to. You've got Noah, Israel and Egypt, the three guys in the fiery furnace, Daniel, even the apostles. The argument is that you see this consistent pattern of preservation within a crisis, not a secret extraction from it. Let's zoom in on a few of these. Okay, let's start with Noah. A lot of people use the story as proof for an escape, but the source points out a crucial detail. Noah wasn't beamed up to heaven before the first raindrop. No, he was told to build a boat. He and his family literally rode out the storm. They were preserved through the judgment, not removed from it. They were there for the whole thing. Or how about Israel and Egypt? I mean, during those 10 plagues, God didn't teleport his people to another country. He protected them right where they were, in a region called Goshen. The source highlights this to show that God can draw a line in the sand and protect his people right in the middle of a disaster zone. Protection doesn't require a disappearing act. And then, wow, you have the incredible image of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Think about it. God didn't stop the furnace from getting lit. He didn't stop them from being thrown in. The miracle was the fourth man who showed up with them in the fire. The source argues this is the ultimate picture of God's promise, not absence from trouble, but his presence in the trouble. Okay, so if that's the historical pattern over and over again, what about the prophecies themselves? This is where the source says, hang on, maybe we've been misreading some key verses that are used to support an escape. This is where it gets really interesting, because the source completely flips a common idea on its head. You know that famous passage, one will be taken and the other left? Jesus himself compares it to the days of Noah. Now, the popular view assumes being taken is the good part, right? That's the rapture. But the source asks a really simple question. In Noah's day, who was taken? It was the wicked, taken by the flood. And who was left behind? Noah was. He was left to inherit the new earth. All of a sudden, being left starts to look like the blessing. And what about the whole 7-year tribulation? Well, according to the source we're examining, this entire timeline, which is a huge cornerstone of escape theology, is built almost entirely on one single verse from the Old Testament, Daniel 9:27. Now, the popular view says the he in that verse is some future antichrist who makes a deal. But the source argues that if you look at the context, it points directly to Jesus. He is the one who confirmed a covenant with his ministry, and his death on the cross put an end to sacrifice once and for all. This completely reframes the prophecy, not as some future horror story, but as something that was fulfilled by Christ himself. So beyond just reinterpreting scripture, the source does what it calls a forensic audit of church history. It's asking a simple question. Is this idea of a pre-tribulation escape really as ancient as many of us believe it is? Well, this timeline lays out the source's case pretty clearly. For the first 1800 years of church history, basically silence. The early church writers, they fully expected to face tribulation and the Antichrist. Then, in the 1830s, this idea of a two-stage return pops up,
It gets organized and systematized by a guy named John Nelson Darby. And then, and this is the key part, it gets massively popularized by the little commentary notes in the Scofield Reference Bible. The argument here is that this is actually a pretty modern theological invention. So you might be thinking, okay, this is an interesting theological debate, but why does any of this actually matter? Well, the source argues that this isn't just some academic squabble. It has profound, real-world consequences for how people prepare or don't prepare for the future. The source actually coins a term for this. It calls it the Great Setup. And here's the concern. If you teach people to expect a helicopter rescue that God never actually promised, you're not building faith, you're building a fragile expectation. And when hardship inevitably comes and that helicopter is a no-show, the faith itself can completely collapse. And this leads to two totally different ways of living. There's the tourist mindset, which sees the world as basically a sinking ship, and you're just hanging out on the lounge, waiting for the evacuation order. On the other hand, you have the soldier or witness mindset. This person sees the world as a harvest field that needs workers, and they are preparing to stand firm and testify, especially when things get dark. And this brings us right back to that man on the roof. Here is the source's ultimate core warning. If the helicopter you've been waiting for your whole life never arrives, your first thought probably won't be, maybe my theological interpretation was flawed. It's far more likely to be, God lied to me, the rescuer betrayed me. And that is the pastoral danger at the absolute heart of this argument. So in the end, the source really reframes this whole debate. It's not about choosing between hope and fear. It's about choosing between two different kinds of hope. Is it the comfort of a security blanket that promises you won't feel a thing? Or is it the readiness of armor, which prepares you to stand? So the final question isn't just theological, it's deeply personal. What kind of faith are we actually building?